So hi Herb, hi Hannah, thank you for your time this afternoon to talk about your blogs and what you've got ready for Eating Disorder Awareness Week. I really appreciate your time. I know that you're both really busy. I see you on Twitter a lot and you kind of have a million and one things it seems going on at the same time. So thank you first and foremost for doing the blog. The content that you've got that you both put down is great and really different, which I think is will probably be a thread through what we talk about really. That eating disorder is a diagnosis, but there's lots of differences and everyone's experience is different. So I imagine that's going to be a running thread. Before we start and talk about your blogs, I was wondering whether you had a bit more what you've got coming for in the next week for Eating Disorder Awareness Week. Hope to that with you. What have you got coming?
Yep, so on Sunday night, I'm taking over Neville Southall's Twitter for an hour to do a Q&A on eating disorders, but also kind of more widely on mental health as well, which is really exciting. And then Monday, doing a live Instagram interview type thing with the magazine Happiful. So they're a mental health magazine that came out, started producing content a couple of months ago, and then got a couple of talks, one in Birmingham Uni, one at UCL, one with Time to Change, and then one in Ely on the Saturday. So kind of general, just raising awareness about eating disorders and hopefully talking to a lot of young people about kind of their experiences as well.
Is that who your audience will be when you do your talks at like Birmingham and things? Is it with people that have experienced it or people that the general public, which this will be going out to, amongst sufferers as well?
It'll be for the students at the unis, focused more on them, and probably some of the staff will come along as well who have an interest in eating disorders. So I think there'll be a real mix of people who've been directly affected and then people who probably don't really know much about eating disorders as well.
Yeah, great. So it kind of really kind of spreading it right across, and I guess that means that your talk has to be quite diverse as well, doesn't it, to kind of make sure that it's meeting two different needs.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I normally kind of give a bit of an introduction, I guess, to eating disorders generally, but then I aim to try and finish with some top tips and practical advice so that if you're worried about family or friends or people that you work with, then you can kind of know, I guess, how to approach eating disorders and also general mental health stuff with those individuals as well.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic and very busy.
It's good, it's exciting.
Do you reward yourself after such like a busy period of time? Because I know that to me it looks like you're always that busy, but I think something that I often promote in mental health is always that if you have a period of like intense stress or a really busy period, that a reward is sometimes really good to kind of self-care afterwards. Do you practice that by any chance?
I try to. I'm very bad at it. I think I find it very difficult to switch off. But I got some vouchers for Christmas to get my nails done. So I'm going to book that probably the week after next when it's a bit quieter.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. What about you, Hannah? What have you got coming up?
So I've got a really exciting week as well. On Monday, I've got a couple of radio interviews to do, which is really exciting. Really interestingly, a radio station called The Voice of Islam asked me to talk on eating disorders, just to show the massive diversity of people that can get eating disorders. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've got on the 1st, which I'm really excited about, I've managed to pull together a big event, a coffee morning for Socket Week, which is what Beat are running as their sort of recognition of eating disorders awareness week, and I've managed to pull together some big characters from the world of eating disorders, if you like, if that's the right way to put it. So I've got a member of parliament coming, I've got the campaign manager for Beat coming, I've got the head of clinical services for Bedfordshire, which is where I'm from, and Luton coming, and a number of different other people, and we're all just going to come together to basically show that we are trying to improve services and access to treatment for eating disorders, which is really, really great. I'm really excited about that. I've got some articles and some more blogs coming out next week, thinking about all different aspects of eating disorders, and a nice bit in our local press, because I always love the local press. So yeah, it's a busy week and it's going to be really interesting. I've got a carers talk as well on Thursday, which I'm looking forward to doing, so I've not done that before. So yeah, a busy one, but a really exciting one, I think.
Really excited as well. Excellent. Do you have any preference about what areas that you prefer to kind of work in, or are you quite comfortable and passionate about all across the board?
So I'm definitely quite comfortable talking about everything. I really like focusing on the idea of recovery in a more holistic way. So really thinking about life without the illness. I really struggled when I came out of that inpatient, outpatient phase to get my life back together, because I didn't kind of have the support to get back to work, to fall in love again, to restore the friendships. And it's that I think it's actually so integral to getting your life back. And actually that part of recovery can almost be a little bit exciting. And that's the bit that I really enjoy talking about the most.
Excellent. Which is evident really in your blog, which I'd like to discuss a little bit further with you as well. I think recovery, I got veins of recovery through both of them, even though yours, Herb, seemed to be very much about how your eating disorder developed. And if we start with yours first, actually, yours was really focusing on the friendship that you had with anorexia.
Yeah.
And what I liked about it is that you deemed it a friendship, and that you spoke about her as, well, anorexia as her. So she kind of had her own identity. And I think that it really kind of heightened the power that anorexia had from the very beginning, even until the end as well. And something that she seemed to give to you was the ability to deny your feelings. I think that was kind of how you said that she hooked you, really, is that she kind of gave you a focus and allowed you to deny any negative feelings. Would you be able to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think for me, so I really struggled to deal with kind of any sort of emotion when I was growing up, particularly negative emotion. And the anorexia kind of switched that emotion off. So I guess it was a really good distraction. So practically, like, I think about calories and exercise, and kind of how, I guess, to cheat the system a bit and get away with not eating, which was that added distraction. But also just generally kind of reassuring you and making you feel better about things. So if you missed a meal, you'd start to, you would just feel better. You'd start to feel more positive about life. You'd feel like you had a bit more of a purpose, and you'd get kind of this extra added value and happiness from something else. And for me, the good thing, I guess, was that it wasn't ever going to go away, I thought. And kind of with all other relationships, there's always a chance that they'll break down or someone will upset you. But with this anorexic voice, it wasn't like that. It was much more long-term. And you kind of put all your trust into it, which you kind of then get reward for doing that as well.
I've got many years of experience working with domestic abuse, really. So, kind of abusive relationships. And the way that you spoke about anorexia really kind of gave me a similar feel to that. And, even when you say that anorexia seemed like she was going to be there forever, I imagine that that's also one of the really difficult things in recovery, is that, kind of saying bye or leaving her behind. Because I think with abusive relationships particularly, it's kind of when people say, yeah, but you can't be there for me all the time, even though what you offer me is healthy. My anorexia or my abusive partner is there for me all the time. Like, even when you've got to go to work and you've got to live your own life, I have comfort in knowing that even though it's not necessarily good for me, they're there for me all the time. Is that something that you can relate to with your eating disorder?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is a struggle to kind of let go of it, actually. And throughout my kind of whole recovery, there's been points where I've kind of clung back onto it again and wanted that kind of reassurance back. And particularly at first, I didn't want to completely let go of it. And I think a lot of people with anorexia, there's that kind of danger that actually you're always going to listen to that voice, and you can kind of manage your weight at a certain way and maybe be healthy. but you're always going to kind of let that voice win and help you feel better about everything. And I think a lot of people find that really hard to switch off. And I don't think it's easy. I think there's been times in my recovery, like when my grandma died, and I kind of felt sucked in again by the voice in my head, and I wanted that kind of something back that would reassure me, because I didn't think anyone else could do that. So I think you have to learn to kind of manage it actually, and manage that inner dialogue so that you feel able to push back on it if it kind of becomes a struggle again.
Yeah. And would you say that's a constant management as opposed to, because I think recovery is, you know, I think it can be in different ways, you know, like if you're recovered, it suggests that it's further, whereas recovery is arguably a journey. I mean, what would you say about that, Hannah? Because I think that yours was particularly about the recovery journey, and about, I guess your blog was about building the magnitude of that and saying how big it was and how many people are involved. Would you say that it's very much a process as opposed to an event?
Absolutely. And I think the more that we consider it as a process, and I hate using this word, but a journey, the less we put pressure on ourselves to be that recovered state. Because as Hope says, you know, things happen in our lives. For me, equally, it was my grandma dying, that it's not a trigger, but I became more acutely aware that, suddenly that inner dialogue had come back, and that I needed to just ground myself, get that balance again. That, you know, if I had that pressure that I must be recovered, that's really ticking that perfectionist box again that I know I really fall into. And actually just keeping myself on a steady state is much better, and just thinking about being on an even keel rather than being in this euphoric state of, yes, a recovered person. Just being content. I like to think of it, I wrote about this yesterday, it's a roller coaster, isn't it? You know, life goes up and down, and recovery is very much the same. But instead of being on a roller coaster, I like to think that we're on a bit more of a lazy river. So yes, we're still on this journey, and you know, at times it's exciting, at times you turn around and return the corner and something else has happened. But you just stay on that steady journey, and you just keep going.
Yeah. It sounds as though really it's about permission. So it's about permission to be well, permission to be okay, permission to struggle at times, and permission to reach out. And I guess is that all about, do you need to relearn that stuff?
You absolutely do. And I think when I wrote my blog, and I'm trying to get across the amount of people that it takes in recovery to help you, but those people don't go away. They might go quiet for a little while whilst you're doing so well, and it's a reciprocal relationship. You might be able to offer support to them, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong at all with reaching back out to those people in your life and saying, you know what, actually, things aren't right now. I need a little bit of help or support. And there's no shame in that. And I think that's why it's so great that you have, especially people like Hope, who speak out so beautifully about her struggles and my struggles, as I do with eating disorders, but that we very openly say, you know what, some days we still have that inner dialogue, and there's no shame in that. But it's more important that we recognise it and we can speak out and ask for the help. And I'm sure Hope will agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it is important to speak out. I think it's very difficult to do. And I think it's important to not make it out like it's a really easy thing to do. So for me, I really struggled to speak out after my grandma died, actually, and kind of managed it on my own for quite a long time. And I want people to know that actually yes, it's really important to speak out, and I completely support that. But for some people that will take time, and you need to find other ways to speak out if you're struggling. So maybe writing to people or sending a text, and kind of knowing the best way for you to ask for that help as well.
I think with regards to your blog, Hope, being about internal dialogue, that's what's coming up in the forefront for me, actually, is that quite often with mental health, the difficulty that people have in reaching out is the fantasy thinking that if we're not communicating with people and we're not testing our reality, does A plus B equal what we think it does? And the only way that we can really test that is by reaching out. But when we conclude ourselves, quite often we blow it way out of proportion. We kind of give people a really critical, we project quite a critical process onto other people, don't we? So for example, Hannah, with what you're saying, I imagine that when people kind of see you as doing okay and being in a good place, and they may kind of pull back from you a little bit and give you some space. I can imagine, particularly with the critical process of eating disorders anyway, is that you might imagine that they don't care anymore. And so if you start engaging in that fantasy thinking, it makes it more difficult, and that gap really increases again. Would you say so?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, actually. I think, I do. I agree with that. Sorry, I know that's probably for Hannah, but I think as well with that, I think you have to learn how to actually reach out for help and then be able to get that support without wanting something, and also not feeling like you need to prove a point by getting unwell, if that makes sense. So I know for me, I tried to remove kind of all emotion from the food. So you can have a meal, sit down and eat it, and then you can tell someone you struggled with it after. And it's kind of like, instead of proving a point by not eating something, you can prove a point by showing kind of how strong you actually are as an individual by reaching out for the help afterwards, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think in anybody's recovery from mental health, sometimes that awareness that actually, I mean, you deemed anorexia a friend to start with, but in effect, it can have, even though there are unhealthy ways of getting your needs met, sometimes it does help, doesn't it? So it does bring people on board because people see that you're having difficulties. So like you say, you're kind of making a point, and it brings people closer to you as a strategy that is definitely unhealthy, but it's really difficult to break that cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And the illness it's a very, very clever illness. It's almost very good at manipulating you to think that that's the only way that you can get people's attention or their care or their love. And actually, for me, that was one of the biggest things that I really had to learn, was that I didn't need my illness to get people's love or affection. That was something that I would get inherently from just being me, and that I was enough. I didn't need an excuse to be loved or to be wanted or anything like that. And that was quite an important thing that I had to learn, was that I had to really diminish and shrink the value that I thought the illness gave me.
Yeah, and actually that triggers something else off what we were speaking earlier about HERP, in that initially your friendship with anorexia develops to hide your negative feelings, but actually it seems that what she left you with was probably negative feelings tenfold to what you maybe started with, which is such a painful contradiction.
Yeah, it's scary, the power that I think she can have over someone. And yeah, I guess there's things that come with that. So when you start recovering, kind of putting on the weight and all of that stuff, where you then start to just get really horrific body image, which is something that a lot of people wouldn't have developed anorexia because of bad body image. They might have developed it because of other things. But then when you're recovering, you get like all this added stuff that comes back to it. And also just having kind of the fact that you've buried your emotions for so long, and then you suddenly have to deal with all of this stuff that you've never really dealt with because you've kind of, I guess, put a plaster over it with the anorexia.
Yeah. And where Hannah, kind of mentioned value, and the value that she gave anorexia to be able to feel important, safe, to people, and to feel, to kind of almost deserve love. I think that your anorexia, you describe it giving you like a purpose, kind of, and something to live for, and a drive, and something to attain to, which I guess you have to, there's another thing that you need to learn, it's you found value in her, and you found purpose, and so she kind of heightened your positive feelings, and when she left, you were left with a whole new collection of negative feelings, but also had to find value in life and live without her, and see that it's still worth doing without her in your life. And that sounds like a really difficult thing to do.
Yeah, it was really hard. And I think at times it still probably could be tricky to find that value elsewhere. particularly, I don't know, like if you're having a bad week or like if you're having a rough time at work or something. But I think, yeah, you kind of have to hang on to kind of the long-term effects. I know that's something that I've struggled with, is if people haven't been very nice to me, then actually I then think that actually I need to find my value elsewhere, and that would normally be in that anorexic thinking. And obviously now I'm in a place where I don't feel the need to do that and I manage it really well. But I think you have to learn where to go to for that other stuff and where to go to for that support after you've kind of started your recovery.
Yeah.
I think recovery can be incredibly almost exposing, because suddenly you don't have the coping mechanisms and you can't have access to them. Because for me, if I was very low, I was feeling out of control, if I was having a bad week, anorexia would have been my go-to coping strategy.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I haven't got that anymore. I've completely ripped that bandage off, and I felt very exposed, and all these emotions were coming up that were really, really raw and really painful, and my usual coping strategy, I couldn't endorse in it anymore. I really had to fight against it.
Yeah.
And in some way it's quite enlightening, because you realise what's actually going on underneath the surface, that you've just kept on putting this plaster on that Hope mentioned. But to rip it off is incredibly exposing, and it's so difficult to do, and to have to face and have to deal with. And it's a constant, your mind is constantly reeling with these thoughts and these cognitions and emotions and fears and anxieties and all of that you've used the anorexic behaviours to help you cope, and suddenly, oh my gosh, there you are with your trousers pulled down by your ankles, and you've got to deal with it. Yeah. It's really tough.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, even clients, it can come as a bit of a surprise that how exhausting recovery is, from anorexia or depression or from your anxiety. Whatever it is that's manifested, there's always something lying underneath, isn't it? And I think when that comes to the surface and you start recovery and you start, kind of attending to the underneath processes, that it comes hand in hand with being really aware of your cognitions and how that influences your feelings and your behaviours as well. So when you have new information and you're thinking, okay, so this is how to help deal with it in a healthy manner, but yet my voice is screaming this, and in my life people are saying this, and it's a constant battle. When clients leave my office and say, I just feel absolutely exhausted, that's after a session, and we're talking about the way in which you live your life day to day. So you've both been up against, and so has everyone else with eating disorders, that type of conflict 24/7.
Yeah, it's completely draining, but I think you have to realise that actually you can get to that point where you can kind of manage it, and kind of every day does get easier actually, and there are days now when I don't even think about it, and you can kind of go out, eat what you want to eat and hang out with friends, and it's really, really good. And trying to hang on to all of that stuff when you're recovering is just so important. And I think also focusing on kind of why you want to fight that voice in your head too, so having like your motivation sorted, and if you're kind of struggling more, to maybe write those down and have them with you, so that if you sit down for a meal and you panic, you can get them out and be like, actually, I want to beat this voice because I want to be able to do all this other stuff with my life that I can't do if I've got an eating disorder.
Yeah. That's fantastic, and I'm so pleased you said that, because I think sometimes from my position, even though I have, a really strong therapeutic relationship with my clients, sometimes when they're really, really finding it difficult and I say to them, it will get better, it's almost as though they need somebody that's been through it to say that, because that's where they can hear it from.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think the thing is that once you start recovery, actually that first bit when you've ripped that bandage off is really tough, and it's so easy to slip back into old habits, into old behaviours, just because that pain is so raw and so real. But for someone to come forward and say, you know what, it's really, really worth you battling through those first few horrendous moments, because it does get better, it's such a powerful thing to hold and to keep really true. And I think that's why things like Instagram and Twitter are actually so helpful to recovery actually at times. I know social media gets a real some flack sometimes for the damage it can do, but actually I know that if I am bad, if not bad, but if I'm having a bit of a moment, even at mealtime sometimes, if I flick onto Twitter and I see, it's often yourself, Hope, that you've written something that's quite inspirational, I go, yeah, you know what, it's tough, but I can do this. You know, we've done this, and actually you get that sense of community, and that's something that has really actually helped me in my recovery, is to know, okay, I can do it. I know I can do it. Other people have done it. I can do this.
Do you think that contributes to how much energy you both put into social media and your blogging and kind of being out there as well? Is that even the people that you don't know, that they can actually have a really huge positive impact on your recovery and state of mind, I guess, you know, mindset day to day? Yeah,
without a doubt. If, you know, I didn't have the best experiences through my treatment with both as an inpatient and outpatient. So if I can send a tweet that might help just one person get through one of the struggles that I had to experience, then it's a job well done, and I think that's priceless.
Yeah. Mm. In both your blogs, weakness came up, and I'm wondering, you know, as we all use a hashtag break or fight the stigma, which is, you know, something that we're clearly all very passionate about, we put a lot of time and energy into that. Would you say that weakness is a stigma that's attached to eating disorders? Whoever wants to answer that now.
I think because there's that such lack of understanding around eating disorders in general, and it's so, because it is so closely, obviously associated with food, which is one of the just most natural things in the world to do. Weakness, for me, I had to appear super strong in my recovery, and my perfectionist tendencies meant that to admit that I was suffering meant that I was weak, and that feeling of being weak was something that I didn't want for myself. I felt quite embarrassed of, I felt quite ashamed of. But equally, the mental battle was that I had to be a strong anorexic as well. I don't know if Hope you can identify with this. So I needed to be strong in my recovery, but I also, because my anorexic head was still there, I needed to be a strong and capable anorexic. So it was the really mind-boggling and quite an odd conflict to have to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think for me it was probably more just kind of feeling weak about sharing my emotions. So I felt like a strong anorexic, and I didn't need kind of anyone around me to support me. And it wasn't that I minded probably sharing how I was feeling at times when I was struggling, but I never had the need to, actually, and I never wanted to, but I wouldn't see it as, for me, it wasn't a weak thing, it was just that I didn't need to do it. I think when I really struggled with weakness is probably when I relapsed, and I more felt weak for letting everyone down around me, because I felt like I'd let my family down. And at that point I did feel weak because I'd kind of let into this anorexic voice in my head again.
Yeah. And that's something that you say, actually, Hope. I think towards the end of your blog you say something along the lines of that you, reading this, you may think I'm weak for either not having a relationship with her again. And I wondered whether, is that part of the process of an eating disorder, is that strength comes from your alliance with it?
Yeah, and I think so. I think particularly now, because I talk so openly about my recovery and this kind of friendship that I used to have, it is something that I have to manage, because a lot of people who have had eating disorders, particularly anorexia, are extremely competitive, and they will compare your journey to their journey and kind of judge whether they were sicker than you or whether they got thinner or whatever it is. And actually that's really difficult, and it's so unhealthy that people feel the need to do that. And I think that's when you begin to feel weak, because I stand up in front of a room full of people, and I know that every single person there, whether they've had an eating disorder or not, will be looking at what I look like. And particularly with the anorexic people in the room, however far through their recovery they are, they'll probably be judging that actually. And I find it really like disheartening that actually, like it's really sad that people feel the need to do that actually, and particularly when you're trying to just talk positively about recovery, it makes it quite a challenge because you feel constantly judged by those individuals, and that they're just looking at you thinking you're weak because you can't skip a meal, you're weak because you've kind of put on all this weight and all of that stuff.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a lose-lose situation really, isn't it? And in part I'm thinking that, you know, the people with eating disorders in your audience that are judging you they're kind of in the eating disorder process, so they're maybe in the thick of it, or you know, kind of not really far enough out of it yet to be able to not think that way. But actually, that people that haven't got eating disorders, that you still kind of get the sense that, you know, kind of being judged by weight and size and things. So it's a really difficult thing.
I think I think it's a massive problem, particularly with anorexia, is everyone kind of thinks if you're anorexic, you're going to be like a skeleton. But the reality is actually people with eating disorders are every different weight, shape and size. And it's more about your mindset. So you could be a completely healthy weight, but still be suffering from anorexia because you've got that battle going on in your head. And actually a lot of young people that I've met kind of over the last year particularly, they quite often have this battle going on in their head, but they kind of manage to get their weight just where they think it could be, and they manage it kind of just as a bit unhealthy, and they're still just as unwell as people who are in an inpatient unit, but they're just not able to access the right support. So I think that's actually really sad that they're not able to get that help that they actually need to then kind of get them over that kind of hill and get them kind of back on their journey to recovery.
And I was wondering, sorry Hannah, go ahead.
Sorry, that anorexia is first and foremost a mental illness, and we have to keep that really at the core of everything that we say about eating disorders. I find it particularly difficult when people judge similarly by what I look like or what I'm wearing, but what I eat. If I go out for dinner with people and they're like, oh, you know, if I order a pizza, I can almost feel people want to say, oh, isn't she doing well? And it just sort of, it makes more of the food than we need to make of it, because we need to address it as a mental illness first and foremost. It's so much more than what we're putting on our plate or the exercise that we're doing or what we look like. It's what's going on in our minds that's so important.
Yeah, and that definitely promotes what people are pushing at the moment, is that it can't, just because it can't be seen, you know, so a healthy weight, for example, doesn't mean that it's not there, that actually mental health is intrinsically unseen. But nonetheless, you know, we need to kind of, this is probably why, you know, we need to speak about it, don't we? We need to kind of raise awareness, and we need to kind of let people know that behaviours don't mean that people are weird or odd, but there's something else going on underneath that's causing problems.
Yeah.
If we go to recovery then, you know, I think with what you're saying is that if people have a healthy weight, and I've seen this quite a lot on Twitter, particularly I think on the run-up to the awareness week, is that people really struggle to access the right support that they need. Now, Hannah, you mentioned how big the team to be restored it needs to be, and I think, you know, particularly I got the impression from your blog, Herb, how raw it was when you were taken to the hospital that day, and you know, and you were upset and saying, promising your mum that you was going to eat. Now you're in no position to be able to, at that point, to be able to build the team that you need. So you really, it feels like a really vulnerable position to be in, to rely on services to actually make sure that you have everything that you need to survive. Actually, at that point, when particularly in yours, Herb, you said that your heart was about to stop. So yeah, it's kind of, how difficult is that, you know, to kind of put your life in other people's hands at that time?
It's really scary. I think you have to kind of accept that maybe they might be right about something, which obviously when you've got anorexia, you really struggle to do that. You think that kind of what you're doing is the best way to live your life, that you don't want anyone to take that away from you. And it definitely is difficult. I think for me, there were kind of like a few things that happened in hospital, which kind of made me realise that maybe I did have something the matter with me. But I remember kind of in the run up to it, when I was being told kind of how unwell I was, I thought that just all the doctors and consultants were just lying to me, and I didn't believe anything they said. So part of it is, for a lot of people, is kind of accepting that you've got a problem. And I think that's important throughout recovery as well, actually, like kind of just accepting that maybe you are going through a bad patch at the moment and you might need that additional support as well. But yeah, I think when you get into hospital and you don't have a choice about kind of your recovery, and you get told kind of you've got to eat meal times at certain times, and you lose all of that control, it's really, really difficult.
Yeah, so yours sounds like really difficult, and I think in your blog, Hannah, I get the impression that your team, you were quite, you sound really endearing about them, actually, you know, that it's, I'm sure it wasn't always like that, but it's almost like, you know, they were my team. It's like you kind of had ownership, and you was really proud about that you had a group of people actually that were helping rebuild your life.
I think I had people in my life like my mum. I talk about her a lot because she was my saviour, and some friends who just worked so hard, and when I did find the right counsellor and the right nutritionist. But in those early days of my inpatient days, so when I was in hospital, I didn't feel like I had that team. It wasn't the right, I didn't have the right connections for one reason or another, and it's no to no detriment of the NHS. I don't want to put them down, because the service they provide is great, and it did save lives. It did save my life for sure, but I knew it wasn't that restorative team that I knew that I really needed. But now I know that I've got these people who are just, we're all together, and I just feel like I'm kept almost safe, because I know that whilst I am restored to an extent, you know, I've really started to build my life back together. If something goes wrong, if something breaks down, I've got that team ready. And by being able to communicate out to them in whatever form that is, because Hope was completely right, being able to speak out does take bravery, and it really does take you to have that power within you to say, I need some sort of support. But at least I know now I've got that team, and I know where to go. That's going to be right for me now.
I'm wondering, you know, kind of there's been a few words that we're using. I think you like restore and journey, which I guess I heard you say, Hannah, that you wasn't keen on using. And I know that as I was doing some infographics, you know, in preparation for sharing our blogs and things, I was thinking, you know, kind of like, for a person that's had an eating disorder, do you consider yourself as always like in recovery? Or yeah, I guess, and I don't know how useful this is, because I think that sometimes words can be really unhelpful, and we don't necessarily need to, but you know, kind of, I think I mentioned survivor at one point to you, Hannah, and you know, kind of that wasn't something that you liked. So I'd like to explore that, because I think that the words that we use are why a lot of people would try not to talk about mental health, because they don't want to say the wrong thing, or they don't feel like they're educated enough or in a position to be able to speak about it. So, and I think, you know, this is going to be very much the same as everything with regards to, you have different preferences, but I think with regards to, you know, the words being triggering or kind of being quite dismissive or discounting of your experiences, would we be able to explore that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the word survivor for me, I don't know. It made me feel like it's got that connotation of having won something, and having won something makes it sound like a battle almost, that needs to have this massive victory attached to it. And I really don't want to have to think of it as a massive battle that I've overcome. I want to think of it as something, as a process, as an, you know, this healing, this discovery, this learning, this constant cycle of change, if you like, if that's the right way to put it. and definitely rediscovering and enlightening myself about myself and my character and who Hannah version 2.0 is. You know, that's why I don't like the term survivor. But yes, you're very right. Words are so, so, so important. And it's really strange if somebody says to me, oh, you're looking well. Well, looking well, that's good. You know, I don't want to look unwell. But there was a time when I'd gone, I'm looking well. What on earth does that mean? That must mean I've gained so much weight. What does that mean? You know, and that for somebody else, they've meant that in just the nicest way possible. So it's really difficult. There has to be a fine line between A, what somebody is saying to somebody who's got an eating disorder, but also B, the person who's receiving that comment in their ability to be able to process it in a different kind of way without sort of the anorexic goggles on, if you like.
Yeah, I guess that makes it really difficult though, doesn't it? I guess, you know, knowing whether somebody with an eating disorder, be it in the thick of it or in recovery, has the capacity to be able to hear what you intend in the words that you say. I mean, Herb, did you have a similar experience to that?
Yeah, I did, and I think yeah, saying things like "you look well" for anyone who's had an eating disorder, that's probably not the best thing to say. But I think I've kind of learned that actually, and I guess it's easier now, kind of where I'm at with things, that quite often people say things and it's just because they don't know what to say. And actually, if they commented on something else that wasn't my weight, maybe I'd panic and think that they were too embarrassed to talk about it or something. And it's a massive minefield actually, all the wording stuff, particularly when it comes to anything to do with weight, because there's no right or wrong answer actually. And I know when I was recovering first, I'd ask my mum if I looked like I'd put on weight. And the reality was I did. But I didn't want her to say yes. But then I also probably needed her to realise, kind of be honest with me actually. So for people around you, it's really difficult to know what to say. But yeah, I think as well, just going back to the survivor question you had, actually, I was thinking, because for me, I think, yes, it is a journey to recovering and you have to learn about yourself and all of that, but actually we are surviving. Like there's this massive battle that's going on in our head. And for me, I think it's really important to actually realise that it is that battle and we have to beat it. And I think the word survivor kind of gives the individual that kind of empowerment over the battle and encourages them to keep going as well, I think.
Yeah, and I guess the fact then that you both feel really different about one word, would that then kind of mean that as a friend or a member of family with somebody with an eating disorder, do we need to kind of have this dialogue? So instead of, and I guess have the confidence too. So whereas we might say, you look well, do we need to follow that up with something? Would it be useful to say, because I always encourage clients to check out, like if you know, when that fantasy thinking kicks in and it comes off really critical, you know, check it out. What do you mean when you say that? Or do you know, say what you mean? Do you mean this? And it really gives the opportunity for both people to kind of clarify what was intended and what was being heard. Would that be a good thing, do you think, in the experiences that you've had?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think being able to have that kind of direct conversation about words that stress you out or upset you is really important. I think that's why the whole trust thing is really good, actually, in learning who you can trust to have those conversations with. And even if you don't feel able to say it to someone who, I don't know, someone you don't know maybe says you look really well and it's panicked you, maybe having that conversation afterwards with someone who you do trust and saying, this person said this, it really bothered me. Do you think I look fat? Do you think I've put on loads of weight? So yes, I do think, and I think it's healthy to have those conversations actually as well, because it will give you the power to kind of choose what words you want people to use too.
And build the confidence as well. So I'm hearing you say that actually if you said to my mum, have I put weight on, and although you wanted her to say no, actually it was more useful that she said yes, because then that's testing your reality and it's giving you new boundaries to break, isn't it? And I guess that's kind of moving forward with the recovery process.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, definitely.
Yeah. So another thing that you mentioned, Hannah, was about, because of the analogy that you used of restoring the house, you mentioned, you know, kind of someone noticing, walking past this house So people walking past and thinking that it's just a mess and that it's not worth any investment at all, but walking past and seeing the strength of its foundations, or something along those lines that you mentioned. And I think that foundations are really important in my perspective as a psychotherapist, that some clients want to come through and they want instant recovery, or they want instant results, so that they really feel overwhelmed by anxiety or the difficulties that they find in relationships, and they want it all to change. And actually the difficulty that they have is that sometimes it can feel worse before it starts to feel better, and that's because we need to kind of work on the foundations. And I always use the analogy actually of, you wouldn't build a house unless the foundations were stable first. And I'm wondering, in both your cases, Hannah, if you'd like to answer first, what were the foundations? What was involved in the foundations of your recovery?
I guess for me it was very much about looking to what I envisaged my future would be like without my eating disorder. That was probably the most important thing, and the thing that I really held on to. What that looked like in terms of going silly things like going on holiday, but also much more to what my personality would be like without being dictated by a really manipulative and devious illness, and made me think about the behaviours that I'd endorsed in whilst being quite unwell, which on reflection actually I was really ashamed of, and whether I wanted that to be at my foundation, at my core, if I wanted to be personified by that. And that was what really, I wanted to get my soul back. I wanted to get my sparkle. I talk about that quite a lot. I wanted to get my sparkle back, and I knew that my anorexia had just dimmed the lights, that you know, there was just nobody behind the eyes anymore. And that was my foundation, was that I wanted to get that sparkle back, and I wanted to have something to live for, and I wanted to make something for myself. And when I say that, it sounds very perfectionist, and like I put a lot of pressure on myself to be something and to achieve something through my recovery. It wasn't that, it was just to be me.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually mind that much what that looked like, but I definitely knew what I didn't want it to look like. And I saw this.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just saying the foundations then were about envisaging what life was going to be like, and what it was actually that you was aiming to work towards. That's what all you was investing, all the hard work was the sparkle and the life and the kind of enjoyment that you wanted back again.
Yeah, so that just meant that it encompassed my recovery focus, and it encompassed so much. It encompassed really about within myself, so my personality, but also the things I wanted to achieve and my hopes and dreams and things like that. And at times of really bad times, when I was feeling very, very low, very scared and depressed, and in a really, really negative space, actually thinking about those things, having them pinned up on my wall and having them accessible to me, really dragged me back up and really pulled me into a place where I could focus again.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. What about you, Her? What would you say were the foundations, the things that kind of needed to be done first before anything else?
I think learning to talk about how I was feeling, and kind of trying to find the root problem of what had caused this to happen. So I really struggled with not knowing why I'd got unwell, and kind of why it had affected me and not anyone else in my family. So kind of learning to, I guess, processing all of that stuff. So one of the things that probably had an impact on me developing anorexia was I got sexually abused when I was 12, which kind of went on for probably 8-9 months. And I'd never really talked about it before. I went into hospital, no one knew, and kind of learning to talk about that again and actually learning to process it, things like that I really needed to start doing. And once I started doing that, actually, then I learned to kind of, I guess kind of eat a bit more, and then get the energy to kind of try and tackle stuff head on a bit more, and actually just talking and being open, which I did find really difficult. At first, it wasn't like 100% easy, and I guess talking about things that happened years and years ago is always going to be difficult anyway. But kind of as well, what I did do quite a lot of in hospital was kind of go back to scenarios of the times that I had been sexually abused and kind of giving myself power over that situation so that I no longer beat myself up over it anymore and didn't feel as guilty about it or as embarrassed about it. And kind of, I guess, yeah, would have talked about what I would have done had I gone back and done it again, but actually stood up for myself a bit more and things like that. So yeah, things like that. And I think kind of alongside that, just keeping focused on the future. And I think quite often when you've got anorexia, you think that your life will just keep going, that you're like invincible and life's amazing. But towards kind of the end, before I went in hospital, I lost all that control actually that I thought I had, and the anorexia wasn't making me feel good anymore. And I had to kind of learn to accept that actually anorexia didn't make me invincible, and that I had to do other things in order to kind of get my life back on track. And I didn't want my life to be on hold for that long, so I needed to kind of kickstart myself, I guess, to start eating and start processing and talking about everything.
Yeah, I guess it really does highlight the difficulty that a recovery from any mental health has, and quite often there's underlying causes, and even sometimes people aren't even aware of them, are they? You know, kind of that something that happened had such a huge impact because in their mind it's buried away, but actually it gets manifested as something else. So when you're encouraged, when you're in therapy to talk about these things, it's, you know, it's difficult because quite often comments such as, you know, it was years ago, why do I want to talk about that now? I don't even think about it anymore. But actually that's really important, isn't it, for anybody that's listening that may not even have an eating disorder, but are, you know, contemplating or becoming to be aware of quite negative behavioural patterns or life patterns, that sometimes going back isn't a weakness and it isn't a negative, but it just allows you to develop the knowledge and to develop the skills that maybe you've missed along the way because you've buried it, to be able to grow and be everything that you've wanted to be for your futures.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my upbringing, it wasn't difficult, but I did have to deal with, and I've been quite open about this, an alcoholic parent. So I had to deal with lots of things that were really, looking back, quite traumatic from quite a young age. And I had to take a role on in the family that was, it was higher than my age. So I had to deal with things that actually a child shouldn't have had to deal with police and all that sort of things, and having to develop an understanding of quite a really, really difficult situation. So actually by going back, I realised that I'd almost missed out on being a little girl and almost missed out on growing up, and I'd had to grow up in a flash to be able to take care of everything else and to make sure that everything else was in order. And by doing that, I'd neglected myself completely. And that's why, similarly like Hope, I really struggle with self-care now, because it's not something that I do. I sort everything else out. I've got to make sure everything else is perfect and right. And then I look after myself. And actually picking away at it and realising just what an adverse effect all these little things that I'd had to deal with, made me realise so much more, gave me so much more insight into, this was almost my way of going, okay, you know what, I'm not okay. I can't speak out, but I'm not okay right now. And it did take a lot of peeling away of the layers to really get to that.
Yeah. I feel as though, you know, kind of I could sit here and talk to you both for ages. I think I love how much insight you've got, but clearly you've worked really hard for that. And, you know, you're very evident of the amount of work that needs to be put in to get your life to a place where you want it to be, to where you feel like nothing's out of reach anymore, and, you know, you're not kind of living oppressed by your mental illness, that actually you are constantly managing it and that you're doing really well. And I think you're an inspiration with all the work that you do to kind of put that out there. I think there are so many young people particularly, and, you know, and sadly adults as well, that still have gone missed with regards to getting support, or even the permission to, you know, to kind of, like you said, self-care, the permission to speak out, the permission to reach out as well and have needs. I can't thank you enough for the blogs that you've written and for your time today. I really hope that in future we will be able to kind of do some more work. I'm developing some areas within schools and things, so if you're both willing to be involved in that, I think you've already said that you'd be up for that, then I'm really keen to kind of work alongside you and you know, kind of keep doing this and producing some great content together. I know you've got busy afternoons, so I think we're going to leave it there. Is there anything else that you kind of want to say to finish up on before we finish?
I guess thank you to you for organising all this. I think quite often people don't think eating disorders are kind of the sexy mental health problem anymore. So it's important to have people like you kind of championing it for the rest of us and helping raise that awareness.
You're very welcome. I think that at the moment the mental health perception is changing, but there seems to be a focus on the more at risk, the more comfortable things to talk about, the things that we kind of see more often, like anxiety and depression and things. And I think that, you know, it has to start somewhere, and that in itself is an absolute credit to everybody, you know, that's speaking about that. But eating disorders is definitely not something that you see unless you're following, for example, the right people on Twitter like yourselves. So I appreciate what you're saying. Thank you, Hope.
Yeah, I just want to obviously echo what Hope's saying. Thank you so much. You've given myself and Hope the opportunity to write and speak about eating disorders, giving two quite different insights. I think it's actually come together really, really well. And also thank you to Hope for letting me share that platform with her. So yeah, and to anybody that's watching this, recovery is tough, but rip the bandage off, we feel.